I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network, joined by Anita Dunn, Senior Advisor to President Joe Biden. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me on here.
All right, let's talk about priorities, the priorities of President Biden, the priorities of MAGA Republicans. So Republicans are spending their time since Congress returned from August recess, launching an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. What is your response to what they're doing?
Well, it's a simple response, which is, the president gets up every morning and he goes to work and he works on what matters to the American people, which is an economy that is built from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down. So if you look at who is benefiting from Joe Biden's economic programs, it's the people who go to work every day. It's not the people who are worried about their investments as much as they're the people who want to save money to make investments. The people want to have that down payment for their first home or their second home. The people who are worried about their student debt and who, frankly, would have liked to have seen us be able to forgive the money as we're trying to do. And I think that the one thing the president is bound and determined to do is to make sure we find a way to do student debt relief. So we're keeping fighting out there. I just want everybody to know that. The Republicans in Congress, because I have to be careful here, the Republicans in Congress seem to have as their priority either tearing down Joe Biden in any way they can, because maybe some people on the outside are telling them it would be politically advantageous to pull him into an impeachment inquiry that has no basis whatsoever. But what they're not doing is they're not trying to lower prices. They're not trying to build a better economy. They're not trying to figure out how to address climate change. They're not trying to do any of those things. Instead, what they're trying to do is impeach Joe Biden and shut down the government, which really, at the end of the day, doesn't feel like what they were elected to do, except maybe in a few districts.
Well, here's the thing. When President Biden and Democrats push through an important initiative, for example, infrastructure, what we see happen time and time again is the Republicans in Congress will try to block that from happening, do everything in their power to try to stop it. And then when it becomes a popular initiative, and we've seen this also with the Affordable Care Act, they pretend that they were the ones who did it and they were the ones who supported it. Then they go to their constituents during the August recess and say, look at this fire department that's being built. Look at this bridge. Look at these roads. So how do people know, though? Because people aren't in the weeds of, I wish people are, but people aren't in the weeds. So how do we let people know these people voted against that thing?
It's a great question. As the president likes to say, see you at the ribbon cutting. I think the infrastructure law did have some Republican votes. It didn't have a lot of Republican votes, but it definitely had some Republican votes. The Inflation Reduction Act, which is what has made the largest investment in clean energy technology in the history of this country, and is the source of so many of those wind turbines that are being built here, the solar panels that are now being built here instead of imported, all those jobs that are being created in places like Georgia, places like Texas. Not one Republican voted for those programs. And it's on all of us. People complain all the time and say, why aren't we doing a better job getting our message out? And I'll take some blame on that. But at the end of the day, it's on each and every one of us who support these things to be out there and to counter the Republican misinformation and disinformation, and particularly taking credit for things they didn't do. One of my favorite things last year was watching Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida announcing significant investments in bringing broadband to rural areas of his state. I can tell you whose money he was using, whose program he was using. It wasn't anything the state of Florida was doing. It was the federal government, of course. And it was Joe Biden's Infrastructure Act that funded those investments. So everywhere we see Republicans doing this, we have to call them on it, and we have to call them loudly. I think this White House has not been that shy on calling people out on these things.
So we're less than 2 weeks away right now from a government shutdown because Republicans in Congress aren't doing their work. You've got Marjorie Taylor Greene posting on her social media that the Republican 5 families are divided in two families, like referring to it as some cosplay mafia style game with all of that chaos going on, and Americans very worried. Is government going to shut down? Are the programs that I rely on going to be shut down? Well, Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about the 5 families of Republican mafia, and as Lauren Boebert's blowing vape smoke into pregnant women's faces at theaters, what's the message of the White House here?
You know, Congress has a simple job, which is they need to fund the government and keep it open. And they don't seem to be able to do that. The message from this White House is going to be, we're going to make sure people get their Social Security checks. We're going to make sure people can get the health care they need. We're going to make sure that planes can take off and land safely. We're going to make sure that we do everything we can within our legal power to protect people during this period and to make sure government functions as much as we can. But let's be honest, they have the ability to shut down the government, and there's certain things government won't be able to do. If you're planning to go to a national park, the odds are you probably won't be able to get there. Yes, you'll get your Social Security check, but if something goes wrong and it doesn't get deposited to your account the way it's supposed to, there won't be anyone there to answer the phone. What this White House will do is work with the people in the Senate and in the House who actually believe they have a responsibility to make government function for the American people. There will be no doubt who is bringing about the chaos, and we will make sure people understand it, because the reality is that Speaker Kevin McCarthy made a deal with both the Senate and with this White House earlier this summer on deficit reduction, but also on funding the government. What we're saying now is keep your end of the deal. We're keeping our end of the deal. Everybody should just keep the agreement that they all voted on and that they all shook hands on. And for some reason, the House Republicans don't believe a deal's a deal. They don't believe a handshake's a handshake. And they don't believe government's important enough to keep open. But I think they will hear from their constituents. And I do encourage everyone who's watching your program to make their voices heard if the government shuts down. Because, I've been around this a long time. You can see my gray hair here. The one thing that this system responds to is pressure from the people of this country. So that's where the pressure has to come from.
And I think the media, and I'm going to be very gentle and nice here, needs to do a much better job promoting the facts, not a political party, just facts and evidence. Because what I see, and one of the reasons I created the MeidasTouch Network, is I see a group of people who aren't all just Democrats. It's Democrats, conservatives, who are not this kind of MAGA unserious style, in my view, conservative, liberals, progressives, independents, people who say, I'm not any political party, people who want government to be serious, people who want normalcy. I see that as a group. And then I see there's a group of people, as I mentioned, doing this kind of cosplay mafia, orange mafia fascism shtick, it's just very bizarre. But the media seems to both sides this. Now, back in 2009, you famously warned at that time, when you were a part of the Obama administration, how Fox had become a research arm for the Republican Party. And a lot of people agreed with you at that time. You also received some criticism then for calling that out back in 2009. Seemed pretty prescient.
Well, thank you for that. Nobody who had been through the 2008 campaign or who was watching carefully in 2009 really could have disagreed with the idea that, back then a Fox News network was not functioning the way a traditional news network does. That the sort of creation of stories to garner outrage and then to cover the outrage as a problem for the Obama administration was striking even then. And I think anyone who has watched what has happened since then, it's been 14 years, nothing's really gotten better and a lot has gotten worse. The both sidesism is not new in politics or in press. It's what masquerades as objectivity. But the reality is there are fundamental truths out there. There are facts out there. And facts and truths should get more weight. Boy, back in the mid 1990s, if you can believe it, I talked at the time about what I called, you know, moon journalism, which is, if candidate A says the moon is a cold, hard rock and candidate B says it's a, lump of green cheese, that nobody called Neil Armstrong to say, well, what'd you find when you were up there? Was it a rock? Was it cheese, right? It was just candidates trade accusations on makeup of the moon. And I think people in this country increasingly are cynical, not just about government and institutions, but about the press because of this. I think that they feel like they want to know, where can I get the facts? Where can I find out what's really going on? And I think it does a disservice to people in this country when you get this both sides stuff. And you're right. The shutdown is lending itself to that already. It's who's up, who's down. Can Joe Biden find a way out? Is he winning or losing? When actually their lives that are going to be touched and there are functions of government that are really important that aren't going to get funded unless the House Republicans come to the table and keep their word on the deal they cut 3 months ago.
I want to talk about Bidenomics versus MAGA-nomics. We've seen President Biden previously using the term Bidenomics. I think it was first attempted to be used pejoratively by the Wall Street Journal. But just like Let's Go Brandon, I think President Biden's had a great way of just turning these attacks into, okay, I'm Dark Brandon. Okay, you want to talk about Bidenomics? Let's talk about helping the American people. But this contrast between Bidenomics and MAGAnomics, and as President Biden has always said, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And it seems that's what's set up right there is just, here's what I'm about, here's what MAGAnomics is about. And so can you tell us about that contrast?
Yeah, and it's the easiest contrast in the world. Bidenomics is very simple. It's about making sure that the economy grows from the middle out and the bottom up. And what does that mean? That means middle class families. When the middle class gets bigger, when they're doing well, the economy grows. So it's about growing the economy, but growing the economy by making sure that people who work hard for a living get rewarded for their work. It's about making sure that government invests in the kinds of programs that allow people to move ahead in this country and to feel as though if they work hard and they do their jobs, they can get ahead. What trickle down, what top down is about has been with us now since the early 80s as kind of a governing economic philosophy, is one that says you keep taxes really, really low for the people at the top of the pyramid, and the amount of money they spend will kind of trickle down across the rest of the economy, and that at the end of the day, the people at the bottom will get some of those little drops. And Joe Biden fundamentally refuses to view this economy as that kind of trickle-down pyramid. He just doesn't think it's right. As he likes to say, he brings Scranton, Pennsylvania, not Park Avenue, to these discussions. So Bidenomics is about investing in what's going to make this country stronger, going to make our economy grow, and above all, grow the middle class and give the working class the opportunity to get ahead. And MAGAnomics is very simply about making sure a small group of people do and corporations do extraordinarily well, as opposed to investing in the kind of foundation of future economic growth. And we've seen what happened in those hollowed out communities across this country where jobs left and they didn't come back. And now those communities are seeing jobs are coming back. Factories are being reopened. They're making different things, but they're making it here in America. And that's Joe Biden's vision for this future and for the future of the American economy, is it grows, but it grows the right way.
And that's where I think having the data presented objectively, like look how much jobs were lost by Donald Trump. And then I know that the MAGAnomics people go, oh, but that was because of COVID. Well, you don't get you're a president. You're supposed to deal with emergencies, number one. But number two, the country was heading into a recession before COVID. Like if you look at all the data of where it even was before COVID, I like to show people all that objective data and go, it wasn't great. It wasn't good. It was very problematic then as well. And that's why I think it's important just to get objective data out and let people say, just here's what the data says. Final words, Anita Dunn, before we leave, any kind of message you want to give to the American people and to the millions of people who watch the MeidasTouch network, who have been, a lot of them, cutting their cords from cable and get their news exclusively here now from the MeidasTouch network.
Here's what I want to say. Stay engaged. Stay engaged. Stay active. Make your voices heard. Keep people accountable, whether it's this White House or Congress or your local officials. But the only way we change things, given the extraordinary forces in this country against change and against making things better, making things fairer, is when people get involved. So I am a huge believer, whether it's at the local level, the national level, whatever you are doing, stay involved, search out the truth, and hold institutions and the people in those institutions accountable. So that's my final word.
Anita Dunn, Senior Advisor to President Biden, thanks for joining us here on the MeidasTouch Network. We hope you'll come back.
Oh, I will, believe me. And thank you for having me, especially since the ratings are now quadruple anybody else's, right? So we'll be back. Okay.
Thank you. Everybody, make sure you hit subscribe on our YouTube channel right now. And thank you so much for watching.
Hey, Meidas Mighty, love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.